Welcome to part 3 of the Digital Leadership course, where we're talking about assessment and evaluation. And in this module, Module 2, we'll look at inclusion and online assessment. 3 parts to this. We're going to have a look at student support, diversity and inclusion issues, look at accessibility of online assessment, and the constraints and challenges for inclusion in online assessment. What we want to do towards the end of the session is to be able to identify the key questions that you need to ask when thinking about users' needs when doing some sort of online assessment, explain how you'd approach the accessibility of online assessment, and you should also be able to evaluate the key elements of diversity and inclusion for online assessment. At the end of the module, you'll have covered all 3 of those learning objectives. Let's think about assessing in an online environment. Again, thinking of the key elements that we've considered throughout this course. Think about more opportunities and options for peer assessment. Online assessment also allows different types of assessment and potentially more structure. As I said before, it's a bit about being able to plan ahead, set up the assessment, and your design considerations will take a lot more detail into thought than perhaps you've done before. So there's more structure there and more guidance and narration for students, which there has to be, because if it's online and you're not there to help them, you will develop that structure and support them with that. And there's also the option for greater personalization. At the moment, if you create an assessment that is generic, it's great. It'll be able to cover the learning objectives. With the tools we have available in the online environment, we can develop greater personalization. We can use tools that will create a bank of questions and answers and be able to personalize those going forward. Also with branching scenarios and lots of other things. So these are the key themes running throughout all of these modules. So keep these in mind as we're going through. So as far as student support goes and thinking about diversity and inclusion issues, there are some key considerations and key planning structures to think about in advance. So the first thing you need to do is think about identifying the user's needs. So who are your learners? Who are the students? And what do they need to do to be able to access and be involved in the assessment? Then there's the accessibility of online assessments. How easy and adaptable are the tools that you're going to use for online assessment? Are they able to be adjusted for personal needs? Are they able to be viewed in different ways, etc., etc.? And then you've got to think about the diversity of the assessments. So have you considered the different considerations from cultural heritage and also maybe ethnic backgrounds of your assessment and how you're supporting those minority groups, but also promoting the groups within the assessment? We talk about this a lot when we do online learning and about how you can ensure that we make sure we include everybody, but also show images of all different groups to make it look like we are definitely being inclusive, not biased in any way to any particular groups. It can be difficult to do with material we've got, but it's always to have that in consideration. And the ultimate question that you should always ask at the beginning and in the middle and at the end of designing any type of online assessment, does the method exclude anyone? So is there a group of learners that you know about or you have access to probably can't access that particular assessment, or is there a particular individual, or is there case studies you know of? What is it that could exclude them? And what we're going to do is try to avoid that to make it totally inclusive. So if we're identifying users' needs, there's some key questions to consider. And you can do this in lots of different ways, following lots of different methods. It depends how much you know your learners in advance as well. The more you know your learners, the better and the easier it is to access them and ask them these questions, of course. If you don't know who they are and they're purely online and they're just going to turn up onto your course, you still need to consider these and think about the user's needs. So there's some key questions. What are your students' individual needs? Is there aspects of individual need that need to be considered in the assessment of online courses? Think about do they have sight issues? Is there a hearing impairment? Is there motor difficulties, as in they struggle maybe to click on a mouse and drag and drop? Is there particular learning barriers or technology barriers? Think about all these different things. how can your students access and get involved with the assessment, and what is their individual needs? Because you want to try and avoid excluding anybody as much as possible. What additional support do your students need for online learning? So this is a good question to ask about if you're teaching in a group in particular. Others might know if they've had to support learners in different ways and offer additional support, whether it's one-to-one tutoring, whether it's more discussion forums, or whether it's a particular technology type. If you can find that information, that's brilliant. And if you can't and you don't know, it might be important to ensure that when designing online learning, you do this diagnostic up front. Maybe ask some questions through a diagnostic tool or a survey tool. Or if you're lucky enough to have an admissions team, they should pick this up for hopefully in the application data. Then think about what adaptation can be made to the planned assessment. You've probably already got in your mind an idea of how you're going to assess the learning. So you need to think from an accessibility point of view is how you're going to adjust or amend or adapt the assessment to support those needs. And again, it might seem a lot of hard work and a lot of planning that's needed, but it's very important to make sure it's inclusive and that you don't exclude any particular learners, because that's unfair to start with. It's being a bit unethical on another aspect, but also it can spoil the reputation of your organization. And to do that, check the technology, see how that can help. A lot of technology can be used and adapted by the user at the user end, so the learner themselves can adjust the technology to support it for their particular needs. Things like PDFs, for example, so documents in PDF can be read by screen readers, they can be changed in size, they can be adjusted, they can be stripped of imagery, just have text, or etc. etc. There's lots of different ways. So that was just a simple example. So look at the assessment tools you've got and how the technology can help with that and enable the learner themselves to adapt. And also, they might offer you some functionality and some accessibility testing itself. So Blackboard, for example, as a learner management system, has a tool built in called Ally, which allows you to assess your own assessment methods to see if they're accessible, and it does help individual needs. And then also consider the environment the students access the online learning. This might be a little bit out of your control, but if you can try and identify who the learners are and where they will be learning and doing the assessment, you can maybe adapt the assessment method to support that a little bit more. For example, if you've got students that are working at home in a crowded environment where they don't have any space of their own and they've just got a laptop on a table somewhere with all their relatives running around and making lots of noise, maybe a different assessment method is needed from maybe trying to focus on a test or trying to listen to a video or something. You might have to think of something else there. Or if maybe they can't listen to the sound because they need to be quiet for whatever reason, have a think about it. See what sort of environments your learners are. And with all of these, that's knowing your learners. If you don't know your learners and the course is online, this is where you need to do some learner profiling. So create some learners and develop their profile and think about their user needs. And it's something we do all the time in online learning design, is try and identify 2 or 3 learners that are going to access the course and think about their specific needs, and then think of that throughout, all the way from designing the online learning all the way through to assessment methods. So thinking about some case studies, I've worked a lot with visually impaired students, and this is a good example of thinking about the assessment, because those with visual impairment, trying to look at a screen can be very difficult, and there's different levels of visual impairment, but it can be important to think about then visuals, for example, imagery, the text, how busy the text is, how crowded the text is, how much text there is, etc. And whether you're going to do something clever like drag and drop exercises. It's maybe not the best to do. I used to teach visually impaired students programming, and unfortunately, we used Visual Basic, which was a very visual tool. And one of the assessment methods was to what they were asked to do was design the screen. Well, they couldn't do that because they couldn't see the screen, so they had to drag buttons and text boxes onto a screen and be assessed uh, with their outcome, and that was very difficult. But what I did do was adapt it a bit to allow them to be able to explain to a person with good visual ability to be able to place the buttons for them in the right space. So in their mind, they had a vision of what it looked like, and they translated that to a note taker, for want of a better words, who then adjusted the screen for them. Another college, the College of Education in India, for example, they thought about visual impaired students and really considered things like screen readers and downloadable PDFs and audio files as well for assessment materials. So these are all assessment materials. Can you offer alternative ways of accessing that material? So can it be read by the screen reader? Have you got a PDF they can download of maybe the test questions, so they can view it in their own settings? Or can you do a little audio file? Someone doing a voiceover like I'm doing now, explaining what the tool is. I used to do this for assignments a lot for all students, whether they're visually impaired or not. When I set an assignment, so it's a bit of work for them to do in study, I did a bit of a voice recording for them as well. I found that really rich, and me explaining it helped them understand it a lot better. So it's usually good for all students trying to do some sort of audio file. And it doesn't take that long. Once you've got the tools and you just press record, it takes a couple of minutes to explain what the assessment's all about. So have a think about that. An environment or infrastructure issue is the internet bandwidth. So when I worked with tutors from the Kano State Polytechnic from Nigeria, they explained that the infrastructure was very difficult in North Nigeria. The internet itself wasn't too bad, it was quite fast. What was bad was electricity, it would go off every 20 minutes. So they made it very difficult to put the material online on a virtual learning environment or learner management system. What they worked out is to avoid that is to use mobile phone text communication. They worked out they could put a series of questions and post them via a text message to the student's mobile phone, and that worked more often than not because it avoided the intermittent electricity supply because the students always managed to charge their phones up in time. And there was a lot of conversation going on via mobile text in an assessment to ask particular questions. I thought that was quite clever and I liked that. And text messaging is not to be forgotten about. It's a very simple technology, but so powerful if you're creative with it. So have a think about this particular task. What I want you to do is identify and note down 3 potential considerations you have to make for your students. What do you have to consider and think about when trying to plan an assessment online for your students? So try and think of 3 specific considerations from students you've had in the past, learners you've got now, or considerations you might have to think about for those that you're going to target in the future. So pause this and have a think about this before moving on.